You know, sometimes a headline just makes you stop and say, wait, did I read that right? Well, that was definitely my reaction when President Trump, in his latest term, issued an executive order
Right.
declaring that the Gulf of Mexico would now be known as the Gulf of America. I mean, just like that, on all U.S. federal documents.
Yeah, it's a bold move, no question.
Yeah.
Really makes you stop and think.
To say the least.
It certainly is attention-grabbing. And it sits at this really fascinating crossroads, doesn't it?
Yeah.
You've got domestic policy flexing its muscles.
Right.
You've got these long-standing international norms kind of holding their ground. And, well, a very clear assertion of national identity.
Yeah, America first strikes again, maybe?
Could be seen that way. We've pulled together quite a range of sources for this deep dive. You know, stuff from Forbes looking at the legality, Al Jazeera, India Today on the international ripples,
Okay.
Wikipedia explaining the technical side, the International Hydrographic Organization, even Reddit threads, polling data. A real mix,
Said a lot to unpack.
definitely. And our aim today is to really dissect this, understand the underpinnings, the potential ramifications, especially, and this is key,
Yeah.
when viewed through a conservative Republican lens. You know, understanding that perspective on the legality.
Okay, so let's dive right in. The specifics. This executive order, signed, what, January 20th, 2025? Pretty early on.
Yeah, right at the start of the term.
It didn't mince words. It told the Secretary of the Interior, Doug Burgum, was the nominee then, right?
That's right.
To make this name change happen within 30 days. In the Geographic Names Information System, GNIS.
GNIS, yeah.
Yeah,
That sounds like pretty immediate action, domestically speaking.
it is. And this is a really crucial point to understand. Sources like Forbes, Wikipedia, they confirm the U.S. government does have established authority to manage its own geographic names information system. It's basically their official record of place names.
So they can change their own lists.
Exactly. We've even seen it before, like when former Secretary Haaland changed names considered offensive. So within the U.S. legal framework, the executive order has, well, a direct and immediate effect.
On federal agencies, you mean?
Yeah, federal agencies. It compels them to use Gulf of America on their maps, their contracts, official communications, all that stuff.
Okay, got it. And the reasoning. What was the official justification?
Well, President Trump's statement highlighted the Gulf's flourishing economic resource and its critical importance to our nation's economy.
Right.
And he even said, we do most of the work there and it's ours. Pretty direct.
Very direct. Sounds like a clear economic and ownership claim.
He even declared February 9th as Gulf of America Day. It definitely fits with that strong sense of national interest, maybe national pride.
Sure, you can see the connection.
But that Forbes piece, the yes and no answer about his authority, that's interesting. If he can do it domestically, what's the no part? What's the catch?
Okay, here's where it gets complicated. It's that classic distinction, isn't it? Domestic legal power versus international recognition.
Right. One country versus the world.
Exactly. While the U.S. can dictate what its own government calls the water, that unilateral action doesn't, automatically force the rest of the world to follow suit.
So other countries can just ignore it.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
The Forbes article makes that really clear. Other nations are under no obligation to adopt the new name.
And did they push back?
Oh, yeah. Immediately. Most notably Mexico, right? President Sheinbaum's response was quite pointed, suggesting maybe North America should be America Mexicana.
Ouch. Sarcasm noted.
Widely reported, yeah.
Yeah.
Forbes, Wikipedia, others. It really underscores the lack of international agreement. And you saw this pop up in the Reddit discussions, too.
Oh, what were people saying there?
Well, users like Sethanera pointed out how complex international name changes are. Usually it involves the UN Group of Experts on Geographical Names, UNGN.
UNGGN.
Their recommendations carry weight, but they aren't like legally binding treaties for names like this. It's more about consensus.
So if I'm getting this right, it's legal for the U.S. government to call it the Gulf of America for itself.
Yes, for federal purposes.
But internationally, Gulf of Mexico is still the name everyone else uses and recognizes.
That's the situation, yeah.
Yeah.
It brings up that fascinating point Forbes made about different names for the same thing elsewhere.
Like the Rio Grande or Rio Bravo example.
Exactly. Or the Sea of Japan versus the East Sea.
Or
The Persian Gulf, Arabian Gulf debate. Naming is often about perspective, history, politics, not just legal orders.
So international naming relies more on what? Tradition, common usage?
Precisely. It's largely governed by convention, historical use, and a degree of international agreement, not some strict international law for most feature names.
Okay.
The Economic Times, India Today, they both stress that existing international law and, importantly, maritime treaties already use Gulf of Mexico.
Ah, treaties. That
Yeah.
sounds more binding.
Well, a unilateral U.S. declaration doesn't just rewrite those agreements overnight. And while Wikipedia's list of maritime treaties doesn't show one solely for naming the Gulf between the U.S., Mexico, and Cuba,
Right.
the fact that numerous other boundary agreements in that region do use Gulf of Mexico shows it's embedded in the existing legal and diplomatic language.
And the reaction beyond Mexico. Any other major players weigh in?
Yeah, we saw reports cited in Wikipedia from The Independent that the UK said they wouldn't recognize the change. Their reason, just common usage,
Stick with what everyone knows.
basically. And there was even that mention reported by Al Jazeera of Mexico potentially suing Google.
Suing Google, why?
Because Google Maps and Earth initially seemed to prioritize Gulf of America for users inside the U.S. Internationally, they showed both names for a bit.
Ah, the mapping services. That's a practical impact.
It is. Apple Maps, Bing Maps also apparently changed their labels for U.S. users, according to sources cited by Wikipedia. It shows the EO had some immediate effect on companies operating in the U.S.
But not universally.
No. MapQuest initially refused, apparently sticking to GNIS conventions, which is kind of ironic since GNIS was the very thing being changed by the order.
Ah. Okay, that is ironic.
But Mexico, considering legal action against Google, arguing about national sovereignty since they also border the Gulf, well, that raises big questions about how far a domestic name change can reach, especially with international companies.
So let's get back to the why. Why do this? Wikipedia mentioned the America First angle, national heritage.
Yes, those are the reasons proponents often cite, tying it to that broader policy agenda.
But it wasn't universally popular here either, right? There was opposition.
Definitely. Wikipedia cites polling data, Marquette University, University of Northern Florida, showing a majority actually opposed the change within the U.S.
Interesting. So not a slam dunk even at home.
Not at all. And then things got even more contentious with the White House reportedly barring Associated Press reporters
For what?
for continuing to use Gulf of Mexico in their reporting.
Fair.
Various outlets covered this, CBC, The Hill, CBS, The Guardian, all cited by Wikipedia.
Wow, that sounds like a First Amendment issue.
It certainly raised those concerns, yeah.
Yeah.
Freedom of the press versus the administration's directive. The White House had its defense, of course, but it added another layer of controversy.
Okay, let's pivot slightly. From a conservative Republican viewpoint, how is this action justified legally?
Right. So from that perspective, this executive order can be framed and strongly argued as a legitimate exercise of presidential authority.
Meaning, the president has the right to do this?
The argument is yes.
Yeah.
The president directs the executive branch. So in this view, he has the right, maybe even the responsibility, to direct federal agencies on how the United States refers to a body of water considered vital to national interests, the economy.
So it connects back to the America First idea.
It aligns very closely, yes. A focus on American identity, American control, maybe a perceived need to formally recognize the U.S.'s dominant role in the Gulf region, economically speaking. It emphasizes national sovereignty.
Okay, sovereignty over how the U.S. government itself operates and names things.
Exactly. Determining how the U.S. names geographical features within its, let's say, sphere of influence or direct interest.
And how does the historical context fit in? You mentioned the name Gulf of Mexico has old roots.
It does. Wikipedia, the Texas Observer, trace it back to the Aztecs or around the mid-1500s.
Wow, that's old.
Compared to Gulf of America, which the Texas Observer basically calls a modern political invention.
And this isn't the first naming fight, as we touched on.
Not by a long shot. We mentioned Persian, Gulf Arabian Gulf, Sea of Japanese Sea. There's the South China Sea, Rio Grande, Bravo, even historical stuff.
Back what?
The Texas Observer pointed out the Gulf used to be called the Gulf of New Spain. And even, get this, the Chinese Sea at one point. Shows how names can shift over centuries.
Chinese Sea. Okay, that's unexpected.
And think about other disputes mentioned in the sources, like Macedonia becoming North Macedonia, or the Black Sea sometimes being called the Russian Sea, or the India-Bharat naming discussion. It shows names are often tied up in history, politics, nationalism.
So, back to the conservative legal viewpoint. The core argument is presidential authority within the U.S. system.
That seems to be the crux of it, yes. Acting within constitutional authority to direct the executive branch, asserting a strong American identity concerning a vital resource. The focus is squarely on U.S. sovereignty and the president's role in setting policy for the federal government.
Okay, so acknowledging the international reality, but prioritizing the domestic directive.
Exactly. The conservative viewpoint likely emphasizes that distinction. The U.S.'s right to govern itself versus international law or opinion. They'd likely concede the U.S. can't legally force other nations to change the name,
Right.
but argue this action is the U.S. setting its own standard for its own use. It reflects a prioritization of American interests within its own governance structure.
A statement of national pride, maybe?
You could frame it that way, yes. A focus on American identity and how the U.S. officially recognizes this waterway.
Huh.
The long-term international acceptance might be unlikely, sure, but the legality within the U.S. system for federal purposes, that's the core argument from this perspective.
Okay, so let me try and summarize. It boils down to this. The U.S. government, legally, can change the name for its own federal use based on presidential directive. That seems defensible from a domestic legal standpoint, especially a conservative one emphasizing executive power.
Right.
But that domestic change doesn't automatically compel international acceptance. Gulf of Mexico remains the globally recognized term, rooted in history and common usage, and used in existing agreements.
That's a fair summary.
And the move itself has sparked significant controversy and opposition both here and abroad. It's really a fascinating case study, national sovereignty bumping up against international norms and historical precedent.
It really is. This deep dive, I think, underscores that complex relationship. A nation's sovereign power to manage its own affairs, including the names it uses internally, versus the established international conventions, the historical weight that shape our global understanding of geography.
Yeah.
And it leaves you, the listener, to consider what's the real impact, legally and practically, of a name change that isn't embraced internationally. Does it achieve its intended purpose?
And maybe what does a unilateral act like this really say about a nation's priorities, its identity, and how it sees its place on the world stage?
Exactly. Powerful questions to think about long after the headlines fade.
Definitely food for thought. Well, thanks for digging into this complex issue with us today. It really highlights the layers involved in something seemingly simple as a name.